Hi, I'm Andrew, and this is a talk on how to deploy. And deploy is a very versatile word. It can mean a lot of different things in different circumstances, but I really mean how to take your site and put it on the internet, among some other things that might help you in your adventures in creating projects. Another alternate title might be how to run the Node.js process in a non-blocking way without using screen, because using screen is like really bad, and every time I have to use it, I get really close to just like accidentally typing RMRF and just like destroying my entire system out of rage, but we're not going to talk about that. So again, I'm Andrew. You might know me from either the UPL or from the second story catwalk of the CS building where I stare at people. Just kidding, I don't do that. Gil filmed that. Thanks, Gil. I just got here from a 4-hour flight and a 2-hour drive, so I'm exhausted, but the fact that I'm still up here talking about web servers means that this is a really important topic, and you know it's going to be good. So let's do some imagining. I want you to imagine that you just finished working on a project, a website, and you want other people to see it. So, you can give them your laptop. That certainly works. But that gets expensive after a while, because every single time you have a client, you have to ship your laptop to them. And it's 2024, and the prices of shipping are pretty expensive nowadays. So we're not going to do that. There is a better way. I'm going to be telling you about 2 pieces of software. One is a web server, and the other is a process manager. But fundamentally, there are pretty much 2 ways of creating a website. One of them is building it to a set of static files, or a bundle of static files, where basically every single route in your website corresponds to either a directory or a direct file. This is how you'll interface with a website if you're building it locally, you might have seen. So in this example, I have a page.html file, and that's directly corresponding to the one on this computer. And then we have a directory as well. And the other way of doing it, which you might have seen in either applications designed for backend or for more dynamic sites, is exposing on a port, where you pretty much are listening on a specific port on your network interface, and you're saying, OK, when I get a request here, I'm going to respond with my site. And you might see, instead of 0000 localhost or 127001, they're pretty much the same thing. And this is used when you want to render different HTML and send it to the user. So the diagram for this is pretty much you're talking directly to the server on a port, and the server sending back HTML. But you might notice that port is kind of ugly, and pretty much none of the sites that you're interfacing with on a day-to-day basis have ports in them like this, just because they look awful, and they're awful to link, and they're awful to type, and no one really wants to do that. But it gets tricky, because you can't set an A record that includes a port. So you can't set a subdomain that just magically redirects to where you want to go. So things get kind of weird here. But there is one way of doing this, which is taking advantage of the fact that when you type HTTP into your browser, you're actually directly using port 80. And when you're using HTTPS, you're using 443. So what you could do to get around this is just host your application on port 443. And then when you make the request, you'll automatically be on port 443 already, and then you'll get that. But this isn't really that elegant of a solution, because if I want to have multiple different projects or pages on my site that each use different subdomains or whatever, we're going to go into a conflict where only one application can bind to each port. So the second we make one project, it's completely saturated. So this doesn't work at all. We can't make multiple projects that use one port. So how do we deal with this? How do we make multiple projects that use domains that don't have ports appended to them? And yeah, this is what you don't want to happen. When I first heard about this problem, I actually thought that the solution was buying a server for every single project you wanted to run. That's not what you want to do, actually. What you want to do is actually use a clever program on your server called a web server. And that basically is a special piece of software that sits there and it intercepts traffic on ports 80 and 443. And it's listening for any traffic inbound. And then once it gets it, it can redirect it to whatever you want, which is actually a really clever solution, because that means for all of these sites, we're giving them the exact same IP address. So all of these different domains are linking to the exact same place. But then the question comes up, which is, how does the web server know what site you're visiting it from if they all link to the same IP address? And this takes advantage of a really cool implementation of the HTTP protocol, where there's a header called host that basically says your intent. So even though the IP goes to the exact same place, we know where you're trying to go. And the web server, when it gets to the DNS, you see exactly what they're trying to request, and you can just send them to that. So I've been talking about it kind of vaguely here, but what is this magical piece of software? Well, there are many different types of web servers. Here's some. The most popular that you've probably heard of are Nginx or Apache. For this talk, I am going to be talking about Caddy. I am deviating to get a little bit more opinionated, but I would highly recommend Caddy if it's your first time doing any web server work, just because it hasn't been around for as long as Nginx or Apache, but it matches them in performance, Benjamin, and it comes with some really nice quality of life features that will prevent you from writing 100 lines just to make a simple redirect. Here's a comparison with a Caddy file and an Nginx file. These are both doing the exact same thing, yet one takes much more code. And that's just for HTTP. If I was doing this for HTTPS, it would take an entire other block. So great. Let's do an example. So I made this little site using FastAPI where it opens up a listener on port 5000. And let's say I want to have a domain called I don't know, lightning talks. So lightningtalks.amoses.dev, which is my domain. If I want that to link to whatever's on localhost 5000, all I have to do is make my Caddy file with that directive and then reverse proxy localhost 5000. So that means that all I have to do is set an A record from that domain, and then whenever my web server sees that particular subdomain, all I have to do is reroute the traffic on port 5000 and just send it there. So it's really elegant, and then you have the site there. You can see it in the, yeah, lovely. Here's another example. People here are big fans of Astro, so I made a really quick Astro site about a topic that's near and dear to me. And basically what Astro does, and the feature of Astro, is you can basically you can build the site into basically just like a static bundle. So I did that. I did npx astro build, and that made it into a static folder. And just like I was talking about earlier, I made a directive that just sets the root of this specific directive. I'm just saying this is where you're working. And then I did a special directive called file server, which just means the same thing I said earlier, which is when you get a URL that points to a specific resource, just attempt to serve that. And the thing at the bottom is a kind of notation that you see frequently in single-page applications where you're just seeing, if I type in /about, it'll say, OK, is there about.html? If not, is there about? And if not, just send them to index.html. You can replace that with a 404. And this is the result of that. Emacs is better than U of M. One does it all, the other does most of it. Here's some other fun Caddy features. This one's the main selling point, that it automatically provisions and renews TLS certificates. If you've ever seen the padlock in the browser, that means that the connection's encrypted. For other web servers, you really have to wrestle with getting the DNS to work and then generating the keys and putting them in certain places and making sure that when they renew, you put them in the right place. Caddy does this automatically for you. It is so nice. That's, if not for anything else, this is the best Caddy feature. It's really easy to just intercept the request, and just add whatever headers you want. So if for whatever reason you forgot to add cores, you can just inject that in. Another fun thing that I use for some of my projects is this directive called basic auth, where pretty much every modern web browser has this implementation of a login. That's not HTML and CSS. That's literally a feature of most browsers. It's not the most secure. I'm pretty sure it sends the password with every single request, so it's not the best. But it definitely, if you're trying to make something that isn't completely open to the public, it works. It's good enough. And then also load balancing is extremely easy. All you have to do, you saw the reverse proxy directive I made before. Here, I'm just saying, I'm just calling it with 2 servers. And then I do a load balancing policy of the least connections. But there's a bunch of them. You could do all of these. You have random, where it's just random load balancing. You can do a round robin. It is really versatile. Anyways, I'm going to completely pivot here into talking about something that you may know, which is that if you're SSHing, say while running a Caddy session, or doing anything on a VPS or a server, and you disconnect from the SSH client, it will kill that terminal session. And if you were working on a project or if you had it running, it will immediately quit, and you'll lose all of it. This is what me closing my terminal looks like. And this is because when this session shuts down, either because of a network drop or you closing it on purpose, it kills all the processes running because the shell session is tied to the SSH connection. So there are ways around this. Grace did a great talk on Docker. Docker is great. It's lovely. It works for stuff like this, and this issue has been solved. But it's not always necessary to completely virtualize something if it's as simple as a single Node.js file or a Python file. So that's not entirely necessary. And like I said earlier, some people might be internally screaming, use screen, but do not tell me to use screen. I will laugh in your face. Because people who use screen to run all of their projects end up with a mess like this. This is 5. This is 5 sessions. If you are doing anything beyond this, it will instantly become a headache. You have to look at all of these PIDs and be like, which one's my project? And yes, you can rename them. But when you're doing screen, you're summoning an entire session all for running one continuous blocking. No, not at all. We're not doing that. What we are going to do is use a reasonable alternative called PM2, which is a process manager that is pretty much designed. I think it was originally designed to run Node.js applications, but it works for anything that you can run via the command line. And it basically ensures high availability for your projects by detecting when they crash and restarting them, monitoring resource usage. You can do multi-threading with it. It's awesome. Here's an example of me running this site, the little lightning talk site I made earlier. So all you have to do is just do PM2 start and the name of a file, and it'll run it. And you don't have to open a screen session. You don't have to detach from anything. It's just right there. If you want to look at what I write here. Yeah, if you want to look at the logs of it, you can just run a command. There are commands for pretty much everything. I think there's a web interface for it. It is really neat. Is there a difference between these slides? No. And you can also, there are great arguments like watch, where if you make a change, it automatically redeploys. All in all, it's just so much better. And then if you've ever had to deal with making a screen session, and then every time you make a change or every time it crashes, screening back into it and then shutting it down and restarting it, this will be a godsend for you. Yeah, and also one great thing is just like Docker, you can have a specific startup script that it generates where if your server restarts for whatever reason, it'll just respawn whatever instances you had, where that does not happen with screen. You just lose all your work. OK, so now that I've talked about a web server and doing this, some people ask a fair question, which is, why not just use something like GitHub Pages? Well, GitHub Pages is interesting because it's static only. So if you have completely static content, that's definitely fair. GitHub has nice CI/CD if you want to auto-deploy. So that's fair. Where it starts getting interesting is when people start talking about Vercel and Netlify and Heroku and platforms as a service like that. It's interesting here because these sites definitely work. They help you get a project up and running, but I think that it's better to know how these things function behind the scenes. And you should be comfortable with knowing basic website networking. And one thing that I really like about owning my own VPS is that you're not paying these people to rent out AWS hardware and obscure it from you, and you don't know what you're paying for. It's really, you get the hardware, and you are going to, you're able to literally run it until it's choking. You can run your server up until it crashes. There are horror stories of people with Vercel and Netlify getting these massive bills that their support eventually has to waive. Like this poor person getting $104,000 a bill for a static site just because they were paying for bandwidth, which is insane. And I guess the biggest dissuader for things like this is that, or platforms like this rather, is that their workflows are entirely proprietary. You're not really going to learn something in Vercel that you're going to be able to take with you to use in a different platform. It's really specific to that piece of software. Yeah, so Caddy and PM2, they're both proprietary pieces of software, sure. You can make the argument that you're not going to take what you learned from them and use it in Nginx or Apache, but you still are learning more about the behind the scenes. You're learning about DNS and networking and systemd and all of this behind the scenes stuff that you're getting completely abstracted away by using a platform like Vercel or Netlify. Here's another person getting a $3,000 bill from a basic site. Anyways, yeah, all of this to say, they're great pieces of software. If you want to design a project and deploy it, I would really recommend trying to do it by hand first before just jumping to like a GitHub workflow template that's been done for you. It's really rewarding, and it's super fun. So yeah, thank you.